1993. 30 years of service to our community. Where were you in 1993? The world's population was 4.378 billion. NAFTA was just approved by the US. Toronto Blue Jays won the World Series that year. The top movie was Schindler's List. And the first human cell was cloned. The Journal of American Medical Association published that watchful waiting was an alternative to surgery and radiation. The National Cancer Institute estimated that in 1993, looking for my cheat notes here, 1993, 165,000 American men would be diagnosed with prostate cancer in the US that year, and 35,000 would die from prostate cancer that year. The controversy about PSA testing, so we've all lived through that. That started in 1993 as a result of the National Cancer Institute estimates. They felt it was leading to overdiagnosis. In Canada, the rate of new prostate cancer peaked in 1993. Interesting, though, that the death rate for prostate cancer has been declining since 1994. Now, I'm not a scientist, but those numbers seem to be indicative of something. 1993, a group of men formed PROSTAID Calgary. I don't think it was PROSTAID Calgary when they originally formed it, but I'm going to be corrected by Ron, and because we're very fortunate to have two of the, well, I call them founding members, but may not be founding. They were very early members with us tonight. Ron Gorham was chairman of the society when I joined the board in 2016. For years, he was the man behind Wild Wednesdays, Fabulous 50s car shows. Ron joined the organization, I think he told me earlier, in 1995 when he joined.
September 1995.
Bob Shiell is with us tonight. Bob was executive director of PROSTAID, and in 2014 was our first Pathfinder. He was recognized for his valuable contribution for his ongoing support of men and their families. Both these gentlemen were definitely a driving force of PROSTAID and made it the organization that it is today. So I'm going to welcome you both and thank you for making time for us tonight. And we're looking forward to getting a piece of the history that nobody else in this room would have the same experience with. So I'll turn it over to you two gentlemen.
Yeah, I'm not sure this is a good a good honor to have, considering, but and I like to at this time. Is there any? I was diagnosed in September 1995. Is there anyone here who was diagnosed before that? And I ask this at all, anytime I get a chance at certain meetings. So, I I turn that around, and then I tell all my associates, well, I'm the longest living survivor in North America. I tell them. And, oh, no, you can't be. I says, well, prove it to me, prove it to me. And I haven't been charged, I haven't been challenged yet, but I've been to the PCRI in the U.S. and I did the same thing there. And I couldn't find anyone who was older. But anyway, and I'll just touch on my own stuff as I go through here for the first couple of years. But when you're diagnosed, the first thing is you have a big quest for information. And what I did is I'd had an uncle be in the Tom Baker about 6-7 years before and received external beam radiation. And while I was there visiting him one day, I read this brochure, and it went in and talked about this group that had gotten started in out of the Tom Baker Cancer Society, and a group of survivors. So I knew that there was a group at that time, but the first place I went to the Canadian Cancer Society, and I remember it just like it was yesterday, of course. And I went in and said, I'm been diagnosed with prostate cancer, and I'm looking for information. Oh yeah, she said, we can give you some information. And so she went and pulled out an old black binder, and there was pieces of paper stuck in here and stuck in there and all over, and said, here, you can go in that room and go through it. And that was it. That was it. That was all there was. And this is Cancer Society at that time was right down on 12th Avenue, I think just off McLeod Trail. So I went in, and actually they were most accommodating, and but it was just a bunch of articles written by different doctors, etc. And they'd put a binder. Well, they had something. They had this binder. And then I asked her, well, now, do you know about a meeting? There's some men that get together. And she, oh, yeah. So she did. She had that information. And it was the next week. This meeting was the next week. And that was at the Tom Baker Cancer Society. So I was really rather fortunate that the meeting was the next week, and I can't remember. I think it was a Thursday night. But anyway, so the very first meeting place was in a classroom in the Tom Baker, next to one of those theaters. And so I went there, and there was, it was a decent turnout. There was 15 or 20 people, and there was no real guest speaker, but the chap running the meeting was by the name of Murray Brenner. Does anybody here know Murray or know of Murray Brenner? Okay. He was running this meeting, and he was introducing, and I'll mention these few names, he was introducing the new president, who was Manny Olson. And I don't know, does that ring a bell with anyone? Okay. Well, Manny Olson, if you look at the big rental storage place just across from the airport turn on Airport Road, that belongs and still does belong to the Manny Olson family. And he was a former framer, and I got a whole story I can tell you about Manny's experience of coming to Calgary from Ontario, I do believe, and became a framer. Anyway, he was being introduced as the new president. From that venue, I explained, of course, that night, I told him about my situation. But just to go back a bit, the name of the organization then was Us Two. And Us Two is the American prostate cancer support group. and I've attended them a few times, in the winter in Scottsdale, Arizona. Me and 2, 3 other chaps who from Calgary that were there, and they still exist, and it's a very good. I'm sure a lot of you are aware. Very good website. Still a very active organization. And a man from Winnipeg by the name of Norm Oman had gone in 1993, and he was, the same thing. He had been diagnosed, and he went, to my knowledge, he went to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and attended a meeting of us too. He came back and let the word out about this organization that was ongoing, and he happened to know Murray Brenner, who was a Calgary resident, and so him and Murray Brenner started the Us Too organization, and that's how it all got going. And we were a member of the American organization. As far as places, and the meetings were really about the same format as you'll see today, and not much change. And again, back to my first time there, and introduced myself and said, "Hey, I've been recently diagnosed. This is, September 1995, and blah blah blah." And so after the formal part of the meeting, met up with a couple of chaps, and I hadn't decided as far as a immediate treatment, and so went through all of that. I was guided very well, I would say, at that point, and also by the medical, the medical doctors we have in Calgary, and I can't say enough. They treated me very, very fairly, and we had the 3 choices was, of course, surgery, which I was a big candidate for. I was at least a 9, and which meant I was very, very aggressive. And or external beam radiation, and possibly cryosurgery. This new renegade by the name of Brian Donnelly was running around trying to get people treated with cryosurgery. And when I met with him, he'd run out of money. He couldn't do cryosurgery for me, and he was one of my backup, consultants, shall we say, and he didn't suggest that I should have cryosurgery. Actually, he says, you want to have a radical. You got to hit this pretty hard. You've got it good. So, and I had the same information from the oncologist at Tom Baker, who said exactly the same thing. He says, I don't want to really radiate you. He says, your first choice should be surgery. So, whammo, I mean, that decision was made. And in January of that year, after going on blocking hormone for 90 days, which was to help in size reduction of the prostate gland, the first week of January, I had surgery, and very successful. Lasted 8 years. Okay, wasn't the total answer, but I had undetectable PSA for 8 years, and then after that, had to have external beam radiation, simply to the prostate bed. Total shotgun approach. They couldn't tell me where, but my PSA was moving, and so we did that. I got another 8 years out of that, undetectable PSA, and then in 2011, I had to go on intermittent ADT, hormone therapy. So I've been treated for this disease for very close to this 30 years, 28 or whatever it adds up to, 26 years. And I've won the war. I haven't won all the battles, but I've won the war. And I was detected at the very, very brisk young age of 50. So there you go. The treatment has actually done its job. It's done its job. That's enough of that for myself. We then moved from a classroom. Things started to get going. We got better organized, better speakers, and eventually we got over to the Coombs Theater in the Tom Baker. I think that was the Tom Baker, Bob. Coombs Theater, was that the? Or is it the Foothills? It's the Foothills. One of the two, anyway. Yeah, they all run together, and all of us are, as time went on, we, now we're talking 100 people. Now we're talking 100 people, 120 people. Started to, we became more sophisticated and better, just an all in all, better organization. From there, and I don't remember the year, we then moved over to the Foothills Auditorium, which of course had a capacity of about 400. But, to my knowledge, we never ever, really filled it, but we would get.
Sure we did.
Did we? Okay, I agree with you. Or close to it, Bob. And so those were the early years. Again, same thing. Some really good volunteers. I had completed, I believe, about 2 years of being president of the organization, and I noticed this crackerjack young gentleman who was coming out regular, and I wanted to get him involved, and I did, and we were most fortunate, and Bob Shiell then took over as president of the organization, and he really put his touch to this group, and we owe considerable to him. Bob, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, Ron hasn't left me very much to talk about, so I think I'll just sit down. You can obviously tell that we did not pre-plan this presentation. We totally flying by the seat of our pants. 1993, 30 years ago.
What's that?
There is a writer's strike on right now.
Oh, that's right, okay.
30 years ago, I was 52. Prostate cancer was probably brewing inside me, but I hadn't been diagnosed in 1993. That didn't happen until 1997. I'm not going to tell you my story other than just to say that I was treated with brachytherapy. My PSA is still undetectable. I'm actually on hormonal therapy. I'm on androgel, testosterone, just to give me a little bit more energy, but my PSA is still undetectable. I wanted to talk to you about some of the people that went before us. I've got notes here. I can go back and speak up here for hours, but I'm not going to. There were so many directors who gave freely of their time over the years to help make this organization what it is today. And sadly, one of them, who joined in October 2007, passed away yesterday, Julius Lister. I don't know if anybody in the room remembers Julius, but he was on the board for many, many years. But he passed away yesterday. I'm just going to go back and highlight a few special times during in the last few years. Back in 1999, was the first issue of what was then called Pathfinder. That was the first real newsletter. Up until that time, the Canadian Cancer Society would send out a single page saying the next meeting is whatever the date was. But in 1999, that was the first issue of the Pathfinder. And it stayed the Pathfinder for quite a while. I'll tell you more about that later. September 1999 was a big year for us. That was the year we had our first media campaign. We had 3 radio commercials produced. We had bus shelters produced. It was all done free, for nothing. The creative work was done for free. The bus shelters were donated by Pattison, and the radio stations in Calgary played the public service announcements for us. That was 1999. Jumping up now to 2003 was another big event, our very first Stampede Parade. Anybody here remember PSA Pete? Let me tell you about PSA Pete. He was a 10-foot-high inflatable cowboy. And the person inside PSA Pete during the Stampede Parade was me. I had a battery pack on. I had an electric motor on the belt, ran down, sucked air in, and blew PSA Pete up. That was the first parade with PSA Pete. He made many appearances around Calgary in his lifetime. Unfortunately, he came to a very sad end in my basement one spring when I had stored him over the weekend, over the winter, and had put a case of Pepsi on top of the carton that he was in, and during the winter, some of the cans ruptured, spread out, mold all over the place. So PSA Pete is now in a landfill somewhere. The Digital Examiner, as we know it, was born in May of 2004. And it's interesting how the name the Digital Examiner came about. I can't take credit for it. That credit goes to my brother-in-law, Peter Gold, who has a very weird sense of humor. And we were talking about the Pathfinder one day, and he said, "That's a pretty dull name. Let me come up with something better." He came up with the Digital Examiner, and when you think about it, it's the perfect name for a newsletter because every man in his room knows what a digital exam is all about. So that was 2004. 2005, we were in the Stampede Parade again. This time, again, well, I guess we still had Dr. Digital at that point. No, we had PSA Pete at that point. And he rode in the back of a smart car with the roof down. So if you can imagine a 10-foot-high cowboy riding in a smart car, it was something to be seen. And many of our directors were walking alongside him with placards encouraging people to get tested. But it was a very successful event. 2008, we had our second media campaign. That one was called Staying Alive. We had a TV commercial, we had radio spots, and we had outdoor material. Another very successful campaign. Somewhere along in there, Brett Wilson celebrated his 50th birthday. And he celebrated it in a very big way by he threw a huge party up at the Queen Elizabeth Theatre, invited people to come and bring their checkbooks. He raised a lot of money for prostate cancer awareness, and he was very generous in the amount that he saw fit to give to PROSTAID, and it's allowed us back then to do a lot of different things. I got a note here. What I've got here in this binder are many issues of the Digital Examiner going back many, many years. In January of 2008, the 100th issue. I did the 100th issue. Ron Ron Springer reminded me of something today when we were talking about our meetings up at Coombs Theatre and the Foothills Auditorium. And I hesitate to correct you, Ron, but we did fill the auditorium on occasion, all 400 seats. I can remember one time we had guys sitting in the aisle. Maybe you missed that one. The reason we were getting such huge turnouts is we were bringing in some very, very prominent American doctors to speak to us on topics of interest like brachytherapy and whatever. We really filled the place up. But Ron reminded me, we always, Foothills Hospital provided the coffee and the tea and the drinks. I brought in the cookies and things from Costco or Safeway or whatever. And Ron said, well, how did you get that stuff in there? Well, I used to park in the outside parking lot at Foothills, and I'd go over and score a wheelchair that somebody had left, load all the stuff in the wheelchair and carry it all in, hang my laptop computer on the handles, and away I would go. And I would repeat it at the end of the meeting, take everything back to the car. So this one particular meeting, I was driving back home really thinking, gee, it was a pretty successful meeting. Everything worked really well. The presentation worked really well. Wait a minute, where's my computer? The computer was hanging on the back of the wheelchair in the parking lot at Foothills Hospital. I had taken the goodies back and put in the car, but for some reason I forgot the computer. Anyway, I did a real quick U-turn, went back, and it was still there. But that was something that I'll always remember. There was one other story about Foothills Hospital, another meeting that we had, I think, an American doctor up speaking to us, and I had prepared a PowerPoint presentation on my computer. Got there, set up everything, and then I realized that I left my computer at home. I'm not very good with computers. I called my wife, Cheryl, and said, you got to get that computer up here right away. Well, she did. We made it in time. Unfortunately, she got a speeding ticket on Memorial Drive, but it worked out okay. You know, there are so many things in here I could talk about. I could be up here all night, but I'm not going to. Anybody has any specific questions about past history, between Ron and I, we'll try and answer them, but if not.
Bob, were you around when they were Prostate Cancer Canada Network and we incorporated?
No.
Yes.
Remember what year that was?
I was definitely around because I was president of the Canadian Prostate Cancer Network at that time, which merged with all these prostates merged with prostate cancer. And I was around, yes, I was very involved in the merger and not sure looking back whether it was necessarily the right decision at the time, but we did it anyway. Anything else? Otherwise, I'm done. Thank you for your attention. If anybody wants to come and sit at the table, want to come and sit at the table and have a glance at previous issues of Pathfinder / Digital Examiner, I've got them here. I'd be happy to share it with you.